Friends, Bison country folk, great to be with you here again. Today, we're going to explore part 5, the Prairie of Possibility. But first, just want to give you some updates. I just got back from the mountains, this amazing gathering called Above the Trees, and got to bring folks into the Bison medicine conversation. So it was, again, connecting with the moments or places that kind of touched us, that like moved us into what the possibility of America is, or the United States is. So like the spiritual liberating quality of what a democracy is supposed to be about. We then explored the ego versus the bison in terms of our preferences aesthetically, morally, and then with regard to fulfilling our purpose, and then explored the really controversial question around created again, which I love that question. So it was really powerful. It was about 30 folks, and I am delighted to report that the very first book club just got launched on Bison Medicine. So a group of folks are going to move through it chapter by chapter, like basically taking a chapter a week. Also want to share that we are now 2 weeks. This is week 2 of the Bison Medicine course with Ro, which is super interesting. It's a bunch of folks who are like in that kind of like change maker activism culture space, and then a bunch of folks who are like nuts about the bison. It's like ranchers and people who are, selling bison nutritional products. And so it's this very interesting kind of eclectic group of folks who didn't vote the same way in the last election, I'll put it that way. So that's pretty cool. And what else I want to share? Tomorrow I leave for the Citizen University power and character training, and then our homecoming. So I'm going to bring a bunch of books up there, and I'll report back and see what kind of conversations we have. I'll be gone for about 5 days in Seattle. So just a quick reminder, this is ready giveaway. All proceeds go to the American Prairie. And thank you to Jared Brick of Brickhouse Media for putting all this together and making it look decent. So let's dive in. Part 5, the Prairie of Possibility. So the first quote is from Herman Melville in 1850. "We bear the ark of the liberties of the world." The next quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., letter from Birmingham jail. "The time is always ripe to do what is right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a psalm of brotherhood." So marinate briefly on those two. So we bear the ark, this Herman Melville quote, we bear the ark of the liberties of the world. We already talked about this more or less in part 1, but the Haudenosaunee gave us a gift. We implemented some of it, but the rest of the world kind of took notice and went kind of nuts with it. There's like 72 democratic constitutions now. Now, some of them are in various states of disrepair like ours, but something changed, and partially because the United States played a very powerful role in that link in the chain of democratic evolution. So we bear it now in 2025. We bear it in 1850. That was like right before the nation's second founding, the Civil War. And I think the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote here puts a finer point on it. That yes, the time is always right to do what is right. But our pending national elegy is no longer pending. We are in a national elegy right now, on April 28th, 2025. This is it's a dark moment, and we have an opportunity to turn it into a psalm of brotherhood. And so that's what we're going to explore in this part here. So as our nation approaches its 250th birthday, as new generations of leaders take the helm, we would do well to refresh our understanding of our first principles. We would do well to let the Bison guide us as we honor the unprecedented beauty of our moral, psychological, cultural, ecological, and scientific landscapes, and the new possibilities now available to us. The best time to examine first principles is every day, or at minimum before every decision of consequence. While we cannot turn back the clock, we can begin today sourcing ourselves in our nation's purpose. What we will find will not be merely words on the page written by dead men, but an entirely new picture of success. And it is a future worth fighting for. The last 100 years of scientific progress, civil rights, and democratic diversification have revealed much more about the true meaning of our nation's purpose. While we fought tooth and nail to update it and expand what the word all meant in all created equal, we have spent no time updating or legislating created equal, or life, or liberty, or happiness, or e pluribus unum. It is incumbent upon us to finish the work of our framers, of President Lincoln and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and make our sacred purpose real. As Valerie Kaur elucidates in her book, See No Stranger, quote, "The founders had invoked words whose power even they could not constrain. Justice, freedom, equality, the guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were magical words that had a power of their own and seized the imagination of the people for whom they were never meant." End quote. We will explore these deeper meanings and implications in the coming pages. You will be invited to take our purpose into your heart and become a steward of our nation's purpose, a lay minister of our nation's civic faith. You will be invited into a civic kinship that makes no other person wrong, no faith, ideology, or orphanage, for that matter, wrong, but rather sees the good in them and lovingly transforms and integrates their shadows and invites them into a greater fullness. You will be invited to join a movement that drives you closer to your family, neighbors, community, and the land. You will be invited to join a movement that stands for your unique gifts in a society where everyone has the opportunity to develop their unique gifts, to rejoice in them and be celebrated for them and thrive. You will be asked to make a choice that will fundamentally change your experience of life for the better, but it will not be easy. Wetiko is everywhere, and it will do its damnedest to stop you, to stop all of us. Of course, you can stop reading or listening or watching right now, but odds are, if you've made it this far, if you brave the gauntlet of our orphanages and sense the possibilities of life in a nation guided by the bison, you won't want to stop. You'll want to see what is over the ridge. You'll want to roam this prairie with us. Yet, it is important that you pause and stop reading or listening, watching for a moment to reflect. Go take a walk or water a plant. Consider leaving if you don't want to be tempted by what your purpose, our nation's purpose, and the bison will ask of you. So, get up and go. Thanks for coming back. Now, let's explore what this great purpose asks of us. Our nation's powerful tripartite purpose, all created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to realize the unity in our diversity, e pluribus unum. This purpose is rarely acknowledged. It's even less well understood. And as we've explored, it does not guide our society, economy, or government. Before we dive into the specifics of what our purpose means and do the necessary root work, let's take a moment to explore what it actually means to be connected to our nation's purpose at the personal level. We'll look at how two of our finest American souls, Walt Whitman and Herman Melville, understood and embodied our purpose. I'll pause here for a second. So, journey we've been on. Part 1, our nation's origins, portrait, story. Part 2, the orphanages. Part 3, the choice, the reckoning that no help is coming from DC. Part 4, the bison and their moral teachings. Now, in part 5, we begin this, it's almost kind of like a second, phase of the book in a sense. Now that we know kind of where we've come from, the context and the need for something new and different, we're going to be exploring what our purpose actually means. So, as I just mentioned, we're going to look at two folks, Walt Whitman and Herman Melville, as two examples of folks who have embodied what it means to actually be American, to take on all created equal, to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to be e pluribus unum. So what does that look like in a person? And it doesn't mean that they didn't follow their own purpose. They obviously followed their own purpose, but their own purpose and the nation's purpose are one and the same in a very explicit way, which I'll go into. So once we kind of had this personal example, we'll then look at the collective again. So we'll zoom back out, look at what all created equal means, look at life, the pursuit of happiness, e pluribus unum, and then how do we apply it? How do we, again, make it personal? So, Walt Whitman illuminated our nation's soul and shadows in his life by seducing nature's God, living an aligned and creative life, remaking his country through service in the Civil War, and obliterating any boundary in the way of his fraternal, romantic, and patriotic love. He was the walking meditation of e pluribus unum. In his prose, such as Democratic Vistas, and poetry, such as Salute the Monde, he made a home for democracy in his heart and body. Second. Further, he restated the case that democracy can only work if it is more than the core idea of equality and material reality, the political economy that secures the rights to life, liberty, and happiness for all. It guarantees it, actually. Not just opportunity, but guarantees that you get that. Are supported by a personal devotion and a spiritual transformative practice. So you can't just have the idea and the economy, you actually have to spiritually be transformed. In doing so, Walt accepted the wisdom given to us by our First Nations in the 1700s and later observed in practice by Abraham Maslow during his time among the Blackfeet Siksika in the 1930s. More on this in part 7. As Whitman, as well as his transcendentalist compatriots like Herman Melville, Emily Dickinson, and Ralph Waldo Emerson discovered, democracy must be ingested in heart, mind, and body. And so this requires us to, number one, become whole ourselves, to consecrate a union of self, a growing activation, coherence, and integration of all of our internal subpsychic parts. So our good and our evil, our masculine and feminine, our eros and agape, our soul purpose, our shadows, and our ego parts. So the critic, wounded child, skeptic, risk manager, and image consultant. So we have to become whole. We have to do the e pluribus unum ourselves, recognize all of our parts as equal, integral, and live that. So the second piece, develop an intimate and transcendent relationship to nature's God, as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, so as to be physically healed by, spiritually sourced in, and act as a protector of all life. And the third, be an unshakable stand for our vocations, so that we can bring forth the beauty in our hearts, our soul, purpose, vision, values, craft, into action through our careers. So just restate that. Become whole, become sourced by nature's God, and to have a career that is purposeful, that is fully authentic, where you come alive with it. So Whitman lived these edicts and became our nation's purpose enfleshed in the body of a single person. He became the mission and message of our nation. Through his pain, ecstasy, sexuality, service, and writing, he took on the task of full self-awareness, the integration of his masculine and feminine, transcendent and material, his soul, ego parts, shadows, and his connection to nature's God. In doing so, his personal self-concept approached the whole of nature, or the cosmos. And against the wise and considered advice of his friends like Emerson and Thoreau, Whitman published his heretical, embodied, barbaric, homoerotic, and liberating poems. He stood firm in what Jungian analyst John Beebe termed lunar masculinity, the unwavering devotion to his own limitless serpentine soul, an evolving vocation no matter the cost. Whitman stood fast, erect, published his works, and in so doing bore the wrath and rejection of New England society. He actualized by greater degrees a selfless self-love, a love that shines so bright it reaches us today, some 6 generations hence. And while he was not the first or only one to walk this path, Walt made it to Martin Luther King Jr.'s mountaintop. His example, his words, his legacy are forever secured by his courage to live in total alignment with his soul, body, and nature's God. As the embodiment of a whole person and the whole of a nation, we can safely count him as an intellectual and spiritual forefather of our nation's abolition, civil rights, conservation, women's suffrage, and gay rights movements. Melville took another equally important path to wholeness. To say that Moby Dick is the greatest American novel is stating the matter too lightly. As Melville dissected, explored, and integrated our nation's collective soul and shadows, as no other had before or has since, it is perhaps more apt to say that he wrote the central parable of our national Bible. So, if we have a civic faith, this is like the big story. He illuminated our autocratic and demonic shadows in his characterization of Ahab and Fedallah, and contrasted them with our democratic and inclusive souls of Ishmael and Queequeg. He teased apart the tensions between our stifling white Christian New England autocratic selves and our increasingly inclusive brown, queer, pagan, and indigenous selves. He cleaved nature from man, and then through his circuitous and rhythmic subplots, and character arcs, reconciled them into a myth to heal himself. Integrate his parts and illuminate the spiritual path to make our whole nation more whole. Like Whitman, his light extends 6 generations beyond him. I pray it will guide us for many more. These transcendentalists and the activists and psychologists they inspired stood on the shoulders of not just the world's wisdom traditions, but also the scientific tradition. They personalized and magnified the possibilities illuminated by, or in Alexander von Humboldt's Cosmos, the first grand Enlightenment survey of nature and humanity. Freud, Jung, and William James breached these same vistas of soul and science, articulated the schisms, the pathologies, and the archetypes on the road to wholeness. They laid the foundation for the new field of psychology. They democratized the path to soul embodiment and psychological individuation, granting anyone the ability to achieve what the transcendentalists had to figure out for themselves. Upon all of their shoulders stands the human potential movement of the 20th and 21st centuries, revealing a myriad of paths up to King's mountaintop. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that the struggle was not just a political and economic struggle, but a spiritual struggle, one that requires us to follow the lead of the transcendentalists and become whole ourselves. He understood that we needed to become new people in order to fulfill our purpose. We, quote, we need a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives, end quote. We don't get to have our nation in part. We don't get to have our nation unless we welcome all of it into our souls. We must become it. This reintroduces a critical element to the political process. As Gandhi said, quote, politics should be sacred, end quote. With that in mind, let us begin our path to personal and political wholeness with what Lincoln called the central tenet of our ancient faith, all created equal. The summary here is at the personal level, democracy requires us to become, number 1, integrated and whole. Number 2, sourced in nature's God. Number 3, on purpose in our lives and careers. Melville and Whitman demonstrated what this looks like both at the personal and collective levels. Freud, Jung, and James and others developed the field of psychology to democratize and really open up the path to wholeness for us all. So the discussion reflection prompts are, what would you need to surrender in order to become whole, to become sourced in nature's God and on purpose in your life? So what do you have to give up to actually walk the path? what practices and communities would you engage with for support on this path? How would your experience of life be different if all of your alumni, career, or organizations where you work, neighborhood, and spiritual groups centered the path to purpose and wholeness? So what would it be like if purpose was the new black? If like everyone was on purpose, living it, what would that be like? So that concludes part 5. Something I didn't tease out in here, which I probably should have. So just share a quick side note. So my friend, Mankind Project brother, Rahim, used ChatGPT to do an intersectional critique and analysis of Bison medicine. And it was like, oh, well, they didn't center LGBTQIA folks, queer folks, a bunch of other important critiques as well. And having heard that, I'm like, yeah, I could have been a little bit more on the nose with that. And so just want to name a few things that I did not share in this part. So Whitman, Melville, likely gay. Alexander von Humboldt. So the guy who gave the Enlightenment philosophers like the science, the hard science of how the earth worked, what all these cultures and languages were doing, likely gay. At least that's what a lot of these letters reveal. Emily Dickinson, hard to say, but let's just say that the Civil War would not have been possible had von Humboldt not published his stuff and met with Jefferson. So like to begin to seed that there is a illimitable richness and depth to culture, to nature. So he met with Jefferson when he was president. And then I've obviously published Cosmos, which everybody read. Anybody read that book. Darwin was inspired by it. Darwin basically completed or, took the hand off from von Humboldt. And Melville and Whitman not only gave us, Melville gave us Moby Dick, like the central parable to reconcile all of our opposites, our Wetiko with our soul or ideals. Whitman gave us these invitations, these provocations, these poetic, homoerotic musings about what it means to be a man and also love women, so to love men and women, both platonically and sexually. So like these folks kind of seeded the soil for the Civil War. They illuminated, hey, we can't go on any longer. As Lincoln said, like we all have to be either an entirely slavery-based nation or entirely free, and we chose free. Now, the reason for the political will, the cultural shift here, is because of Dickinson, because of Melville, because of Whitman, because of Harriet Beecher Stowe, because of Emerson, because of von Humboldt, many of which were gay. So just want to name that and hit that our second founding was intellectually, morally, spiritually rooted in LGBTQIA plus voices. So team, I'll see you back here again soon. We'll do part 6, dive into all created equal. That's the big one. That's the one where we have to say like, yes. So that is the marriage proposal from the United States of America to you saying, are you going to join us in this fight? Again, thank you to Jared Brick and Brickhouse Media for putting this all together. And thank you to American Prairie. Please consider them in your giving. See you back here again soon. Bye.